handed us this massive, just deeply compelling stack of historical sources today.
Yeah, there's a lot to get through.
There really is, and it's all centering on one monumental theme, which is the early Meccan period, drawing from the lecture series, The Life of Prophet Muhammad, the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived.
Right, exactly.
But, instead of just mapping out the dates or like the shifting borders in the battles, our mission for this deep dive is a bit different.
We're taking a much more psychological approach today.
Exactly. We really want to dig into these texts to understand the psychological blueprint of a deeply persecuted minority. I mean, we're exploring a community forced to make these completely impossible choices simply for the sake of the truth in their hearts.
And the value of this specific deep dive is that we're analyzing a really emotionally resonant blueprint for survival under extreme duress.
Yeah.
It's an exploration of sheer human dignity. We're looking at the mechanics of holding on to your core principles when literally the entire socio-political structure of your world is engineered to crush them.
Which is heavy.
It is. The psychological endurance demonstrated by these early believers, it really provides this timeless case study in resilience.
So I want you, the listener, to hold a very specific thought experiment in your mind as we go through this today. Imagine the psychological weight of leaving behind the physical anchor of your entire life. Like your ancestral home, your financial security, your familial network.
Everything you know.
Right. Your deeply entrenched status in society. And you pack only what you can physically carry. And you just walk away into a completely unknown geopolitical landscape. And you do all of this just to protect one invisible thing, which is your internal conviction.
It's awe-inspiring.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to understand the mechanics of this legacy, we have to look at the exact tipping point that forced these early believers to make that heartbreaking exit from Mecca in the first place.
Well, the tipping point was it was structural, unbearable persecution.
Right.
The Meccan elite, the Quraysh, they weren't just, passively disagreeing with this new movement. They were actively dismantling it.
Through torture. Right.
Physical torture, massive social ostracization, and these really severe economic embargoes. So the prophet recognized the immense toll this was taking on the communal psyche.
Yeah, you can only take so much.
Exactly. So he permitted his followers to migrate across the sea to Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia, to safeguard their faith. And the profound insight here lies in how the prophet assessed the varying psychological limits of his followers.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, he understood that not everyone possesses the unbreakable internal architecture of someone like Bilal.
Oh, wow, right.
Right. Bilal could withstand unimaginable physical torment, but not everyone can do that. Human limits vary.
Okay, but I need to push back on the strategy here for a second.
Sure.
Because you have this community under intense siege. Resources are practically non-existent.
Yeah.
Yet the sources highlight this really crazy story where a man brings the prophet a piece of pure gold about the size of an egg, offering it to the cause, and the prophet refuses it. In fact, he is, visibly upset by the offer. Rejecting a massive lump of solid gold when your people are starving seems, I don't know, kind of strategically reckless.
On paper, maybe?
Right. They needed capital to survive. Why turn away the exact resources they desperately needed?
Because the movement required structural psychological endurance, not just transient, passionate sacrifice. The prophet was evaluating the psychology of that specific individual. He recognized that this man was acting out of this temporary spike in emotional fervor.
Like an adrenaline rush.
Exactly. If the prophet accepted all his wealth in that high-octane moment, the inevitable crash would follow.
Oh, I see.
When reality set in, when the hunger really bit deep and the persecution dragged on, this man's internal framework would just fracture under the pressure of self-imposed poverty.
So he'd regret it.
He would regret his sacrifice, he turned to begging, and ultimately his faith would shatter. So the movement would lose more than just the gold. It would lose the man.
Okay, let's unpack this because that reframes leadership entirely for me.
How so?
Well, it's not about just extracting maximum utility from your followers at any cost. It's about knowing the exact, let's call it the emotional carrying capacity of every individual on your team.
That's a great way to put it. Compare that rejected offer to Abu Bakr.
Okay.
On another occasion, Abu Bakr brought his entire wealth to the prophet, and it was accepted without hesitation.
Because he could handle it.
Right. The variable wasn't the need for wealth. The variable was the internal architecture of the giver. Abu Bakr possessed this really specific type of resilience. He could surrender every material comfort he had without his psychological foundation cracking.
So he wouldn't turn to begging.
Exactly. He wouldn't regret it. The directive to flee to Abyssinia was born of this exact same calculus.
Meaning it was a compassionate exit strategy.
It was a strategic, compassionate command. For those who realistically couldn't bear the torture, it was better to remove themselves from a pressure cooker that was literally designed to break them.
So the migration wasn't a retreat at all. It was a calculated preservation of the community's spiritual capital.
Beautifully said.
Well, having established this desperate need to relocate, the narrative then moves across the Red Sea to Abyssinia. But the geopolitical tension, it only escalates from here.
Oh, massively.
Because they are navigating this totally complex foreign landscape. They go to Abyssinia because it is ruled by the Najashi, right? A Christian king renowned for his absolute justice.
Yes, but there are underlying cultural mechanisms at play, too.
Like what?
Well, the Arab world and the Abyssinian kingdom, they were not entirely alien to one another. The Meccans maintained regular winter trade routes there, so there was already an established commercial infrastructure.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't just a random spot on the map.
Not at all. Furthermore, the prophet actually had an Abyssinian nurse in his early childhood, so he was intimately familiar with their cultural nuances and their language.
That's a huge detail.
It is. This wasn't a blind leap into the void. It was a very calculated migration to a kingdom where justice was codified by a ruler who actively refused to oppress his subjects, regardless of where they came from.
But the Quraysh, the Meccan elite, they don't just consider this a closed chapter.
Yeah, they are furious.
They actively cross the sea to extradite these refugees. And they send these emissaries heavily armed with lavish gifts, right? Like fine Meccan leather.
Which they knew the Najashi favored.
Exactly, to essentially buy the Muslims back. And when the bribery starts to falter against the Najashi's sense of justice, the Meccan emissaries try to orchestrate this massive theological collision.
It's quite sinister.
They tell the Najashi that these Muslim refugees speak terribly about Jesus.
It was a lethal, totally calculated diplomatic trap. You have to remember, Abyssinia was a devoutly Orthodox Christian kingdom.
Right.
The divinity of Jesus was the bedrock of their entire state religion. The Meccan envoys knew that if they could expose a theological friction point, the Najashi would be forced by his own bishops to expel or execute the refugees.
And this is the moment in the sources that I think requires just intense scrutiny. Because the Muslims are summoned into the royal court. They are entirely stripped of power. They are literally refugees standing before a foreign king, flanked by these powerful bishops with their Meccan enemies holding the bribes right there in the room.
The tension is incredible.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Why not engage in just a little political tact?
Right, play the game.
Yeah. A slight omission, a sugar-coated explanation of their theology regarding Jesus, and it saves their lives. Why risk an existential threat by leaning into a theological difference when they have absolutely zero leverage?
Because it underscores the legendary steadfastness that defined this community.
Okay.
Before they even stepped foot into the court, the refugees made a binding pact among themselves. They agreed they would articulate the absolute, unfiltered truth of what their prophet taught them, regardless of the political fallout.
Wow.
And when they walked into the throne room, they immediately defied diplomatic protocol. They refused to prostrate to the Najashi.
Which is huge.
They stated they reserved that act of submission entirely for Allah.
Which, I mean, in the context of an ancient royal court, is practically a death wish before you even open your mouth.
It completely upends the power dynamic, and when the Najashi inevitably interrogated them about their beliefs regarding Jesus, their spokesman didn't flinch. He didn't obfuscate at all.
They just told it straight.
He boldly declared the Islamic position that Jesus was the servant and messenger of Allah, the word cast into the chaste Virgin Mary.
And the sources describe the court just erupting at this. The bishops are furious. They're snorting in anger over the denial of Jesus' divinity. The physical danger in that room must have been completely suffocating.
The tension was absolute. But this is exactly where the Najashi's reputation for justice solidifies.
Yeah.
Because listening past the theological friction, he recognized the profound reverence for Mary and Jesus in their words. He understood the spiritual sincerity of their position.
Right.
So in this moment of incredible geopolitical risk, he picked up a twig from the ground and he drew a literal line in the sand. And he declared that the difference between their faiths did not exceed the width of that stick.
That is just awe-inspiring.
It really is. He granted the Muslims unconditional sanctuary, effectively alienating his own religious elite and his wealthy Meccan trade partners in one single stroke.
So by holding the line on their internal truth, they bypassed political maneuvering entirely and appealed directly to the king's moral compass.
Precisely.
But, we have to look at the collateral damage of this success back home, because this migration was a triumph for the refugees, but it triggered a totally devastating socio-political earthquake in Mecca.
Oh, it fundamentally shattered the Quraysh's narrative of supremacy.
How so?
Well, it's a common historical misconception that only the destitute, the weak, or the enslaved fled to Abyssinia.
Right, it was just the marginalized.
Exactly. But in reality, the demographic of the refugees included the wealthiest, most powerful noble sons and daughters of the Quraysh elite.
Okay, let's analyze the mechanics of why that matters so much. Because the Meccan economy wasn't just built on moving goods. It was built on the perception of inviolability, right?
Yes.
They were the guardians of the Kaaba. Their power relied heavily on the prestige and deep reverence they commanded across the whole Arabian Peninsula. So it's as if the children of a country's top politicians publicly defected to a rival nation for conscientious reasons. Having the rest of Arabia watch the children of Meccan billionaires and top leaders do this, it destroys that illusion of cohesion. It is the ultimate PR disaster.
You've hit the exact nerve. When your own noble children voluntarily abandon their inheritance, their wealth, and their cultural supremacy to live as essentially impoverished refugees in Africa just to escape your leadership.
It's humiliating.
It delegitimizes your authority on a massive scale. It exposed the moral rot at the core of Meccan society to the entire region.
And the prime example of this social implosion has to be Habiba.
Her trajectory is incredible.
It really illustrates the sheer human cost of this PR disaster.
It does. Habiba was the daughter of Abu Sufyan.
Wait, the Abu Sufyan.
The very one. Abu Sufyan was not just a wealthy elite. He was the unrivaled, paramount leader of Mecca. He was the chief architect of the opposition against Islam.
Oh, wow.
She was born into the absolute pinnacle of Meccan luxury and geopolitical power. Yet she voluntarily severed all of those ties. She left her unimaginable privilege behind to live as a foreigner in Abyssinia.
And because she is Abu Sufyan's daughter, her defection isn't just a personal family tragedy.
Yeah.
It undermines his entire geopolitical authority.
Exactly.
If the paramount leader of Mecca cannot even convince his own daughter of his worldview, his grip on the city appears incredibly fragile. But her story takes an even more devastating turn once she is actually in exile, doesn't it?
It really does. It becomes a profound study in psychological isolation.
What happened?
While living in the sanctuary of Abyssinia, her husband, who had actually made the migration with her, apostatizes.
He leaves Islam?
He abandons Islam and converts to Christianity, so the psychological floor just falls out from under Habiba.
Oh, man.
She is now entirely isolated. Think about it. She has already sacrificed the comfort of her homeland and the protection of her immensely powerful father, and now she loses the companionship and shared spiritual reality of her husband.
She has no one.
She is stranded in a foreign land with virtually zero support structure.
Yet, reading the sources, her resilience never fractures.
Yeah.
She holds unimaginably firm to her convictions despite literally every external pillar of her life collapsing.
Her internal architecture held the weight of the world. And discussing Habiba forces us to examine a much broader, deeply inspiring paradigm shift regarding the active vocal role of women in this early community.
Which is totally fascinating.
Because the historical record completely dismantles a lot of modern passive assumptions.
Yeah, the socio-legal framework of early Islam clearly empowered women to operate not on the margins, but at the absolute center of the movement.
Absolutely. Islam, from its inception, established a functional middle ground between societal extremes. Early Muslim women were not sequestered or silenced. They were vital engines of the community.
They were doing the work.
They executed the migration. They endured the physical persecution alongside the men. They were deeply involved in community organization, scholarship, even the battlefield. Keep in mind, the very first person to accept Islam was a woman, Khadija.
Right.
And the first martyr to die under torture for the faith was a woman, Sumaya.
There is a specific confrontation in the sources involving Asma bin Umayyah that perfectly captures how this empowerment played out in real time.
Oh, the confrontation with Umar.
Yes. It's an incredible dynamic. Can you break that down?
So this takes place years later when the Abyssinian immigrants finally leave Africa and reunite with the Prophet and the rest of the community in their new state in Medina.
Okay.
Asma is visiting one of the Prophet's wives,
Hmm.
and Umar, who is this formidable, towering figure who had migrated directly from Mecca to Medina and helped build the new state, walks in.
Right, a major political heavyweight.
Exactly. He sees Asma and he essentially asserts a claim of spiritual seniority. He tells her that because his group made the migration to Medina earlier and built the foundations there, they possess more right to the Prophet than you people of the sea.
Wow. So he is claiming that geographic proximity and temporal precedence grant a higher spiritual status.
Basically, yes.
I find it fascinating that the central authority structure of this early community wasn't some dictatorship demanding silent compliance from its margins.
And Asma's reaction proves that entirely. She doesn't defer to Umar's political weight. She is incandescent with anger, and she pushes back with this fierce, articulate logic.
I love this.
She counters Umar by highlighting the disparity in their trials. She tells him that while he was safe with the messenger of Allah, being fed and instructed, the Abyssinian migrants were suffering in a despised, distant, and alien land, enduring profound isolation for the exact same cause.
She completely refuses to let her sacrifice be marginalized.
Exactly.
And she takes it a step further by bypassing Umar entirely and demanding a direct ruling from the ultimate authority.
She marches straight to the Prophet. She relays Umar's exact words without embellishment and demands spiritual justice for her community's sacrifice.
And what does the Prophet say?
His response validates her entirely. He dismantles Umar's claim of superiority, declaring that while Umar and his companions hold the immense reward of one migration, Asma and the people of Abyssinia hold the reward of two migrations, one to Abyssinia and one to Medina.
So what does this all mean for how we view the early community? It reveals a group that was highly organized, moving with incredible unity, yet simultaneously allowed for this rigorous, passionate discourse.
Yes, everyone's voice mattered.
Women like Asma had the social capital and the legal framework to demand their spiritual recognition, and leadership honored their unique sacrifices.
It's a profound blueprint.
It really is. Now, while we've spent a lot of time analyzing the migrants, we have to look at the mechanics of resistance utilized by those who stayed behind in Mecca.
Right, because not everyone left.
Exactly. And the concept of dawah takes on a very specific operational meaning here.
Yeah, dawah in this context transcends the modern translation of mere preaching. For a marginalized group living among a hostile majority, dawah became the comprehensive practice of public virtue.
Okay, unpack that.
It was the strategic deployment of good works, radical charity, and the unapologetic, visible practice of their faith.
And Abu Bakr is kind of the master class in this specific strategy, isn't he?
He absolutely is. So the persecution reached a pitch where even Abu Bakr prepared to migrate.
Oh, really?
Yes. But as he is leaving the region, he is intercepted by Ibn ad-Daghina, who was a prominent Meccan tribal chief. When this chief learns Abu Bakr is fleeing, he is genuinely appalled.
Why? Did he support Islam?
Not out of any affinity for Islam at all, but because of Abu Bakr's immense social capital. Ibn ad-Daghina insists that a man who cares for the destitute, supports the orphans, and continually uplifts his society just cannot be driven out. It would be a loss to the fabric of Mecca itself.
That's amazing. So Ibn ad-Daghina essentially grants Abu Bakr his personal tribal protection, forcing the Quraysh to leave him alone. But the Quraysh stipulates a massive condition, right?
Yeah.
Abu Bakr must only worship privately, inside the walls of his own home, because they understand the danger of his influence.
They feared the resonance of his character, so Abu Bakr agrees initially, but he quickly innovates.
He finds a loophole.
A very visible one. He constructs a small prayer space, a masjid, in the courtyard of his house.
Okay.
It is technically within his property lines, adhering to the letter of the agreement, but it is entirely visible and audible over the walls to anyone passing by in the street.
Let's look at the mechanics of this soft power, because it is brilliant. He isn't standing on a soapbox shouting theological arguments at the Meccans. He is essentially weaponizing his own vulnerability.
Precisely. Abu Bakr was known as an incredibly soft-hearted man. When he stood in his courtyard reciting the Quran, he would weep profusely.
Wow.
And the sheer emotional gravity of his prayers, the raw sincerity of his connection with God, it began to act as an irresistible gravitational pull.
People were drawn to it.
Crowds of Meccan women, children, and eventually even men would gather in the streets outside his home, completely mesmerized by the sight of a man openly weeping in prayer.
He was bypassing their intellectual defenses entirely and striking directly at the empathy of the Meccan public. It's so smart. The Quraysh's entire propaganda machine painted the Muslims as dangerous disruptors. But here is a man known for radical charity, weeping gently in his courtyard.
It completely shatters the Quraysh's narrative.
So what did they do?
The Quraysh panicked. They pressured Ibn Atagina, demanding he revoke the protection unless Abu Bakr moved completely inside.
And what did Abu Bakr choose?
Well, much like Uthman bin Mazin, who, voluntarily surrendered his worldly protection, took a physical beating, and declared he preferred the protection of God even for his injured eye. Abu Bakr chose to relinquish his safety.
He gave it up.
He handed back the tribal protection rather than conceal his faith. He surrendered his worldly shield to rely entirely on Allah.
That's incredible. Showing up as a deeply sincere, radically charitable, and openly practicing person can be the absolute most potent way to dismantle hostility.
It really can.
You don't always need to win a debate. Sometimes people just need to witness your heart breaking open with sincerity.
Their very character was the ultimate argument for their truth.
Wow. When we pull all these threads together, the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived, the Prophet Muhammad, is reflected with staggering clarity in the courage, emotional intelligence, and unwavering truth of these early followers. From navigating the geopolitical tightrope in the court of the Najashi, to Habiba's crushing isolation, to Asma fiercely demanding her spiritual rights, to Abu Bakr dismantling propaganda with his tears, they proved that faith is an active, communal, and intensely dignified stance against systemic darkness.
This period is the ultimate blueprint. The mechanics of their struggle, finding the middle path, deploying soft power through unassailable character, and knowing exactly when to protect the internal architecture of a community. These are timeless strategies for anyone trying to navigate an increasingly hostile and complicated world today while holding on to their core truths.
Absolutely. We began this deep dive by asking you, the listener, to imagine packing up your life, crossing an ocean, and leaving behind literally everything you knew for an invisible conviction. But there's another layer to the psychological journey that we want to leave you to mull over today.
And what's that?
Consider the psychological aftermath of their return.
Oh, that's a profound thought.
Right. Years later, when these migrants finally came back from Abyssinia, they returned to a community in Medina that had fought wars, built a functioning state, and evolved a completely new social fabric entirely without them.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you reintegrate into a world that moved on while you were holding the line in exile?
That's something to really think about.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning.